Hey guys, so we're now going to create a database and tables and basically perform what we discussed in the last video. So first I need you to start XAMPP again. So go to your computer and find the XAMPP folder where you installed XAMPP. Mine was in the C drive. Scroll down and double click XAMPP-control or XAMPP-control.exe and you'll see that it pops up. The XAMPP control panel, mine's version 3. Press start on Apache and press start on MySQL. Now go back to your web browser and type 127.0.0.1/phpMyAdmin or localhost/phpMyAdmin, and then that'll take you to the phpMyAdmin web application that's running locally on your computer. Okay, brilliant. So what I need you to do now, I need you to press new to create a new database. You'll see by here, right, it says phpMyAdmin, and then down here you have new in the left hand corner here. And it might be closed with this little arrow, right? If you can't see it, press this arrow to bring it open. So once you've done that, you want to create a new database. Now just for this tutorial, we're going to create a test database that's going to basically do nothing, right? So just call it testdb create. Okay, brilliant. Now it says no tables found in database. So our test database is going to have a test table, right? So you'll see here it says create table. Type test_table here. And these are the number of columns. So we'll just keep it at 4 for now. And I want you to press go. Okay, brilliant. So now it's asking us to fill in these columns. So we're gonna do this and then we'll make a proper database. This is just to show you how it all works. So here I want to do test ID, right? Just do test ID. Okay. So this is going to be what identifies our data, our records, okay? And now you'll see the default by here. Keep that as none, and you'll see the index. Now I want you to change this to primary. Now what primary does, you'll see this come up when you press primary, by the way, just press go. Now what primary does is primary basically means that it's a primary key, right? It basically means this ID identifies this record. There cannot be duplicates of this ID. So for example, if you have 2 records in the database with the same ID of 1, that won't work, right? Because the primary key stops that. So the primary key guarantees this value will only occur once in this table. In other words, the test ID can only be 5 or 30. You can't have two records that have the same ID of 30, for example. Not possible. So the primary key basically means this is how we identify this record of data. Okay. AI here, by the way, this is auto increment. So I recommend checking this. I always check it, right? Because what happens is it means the one you create 1 record, the ID is 1. Next record you create, the ID is 2. Next record 3. It automatically increments it for you each time, which is a really helpful feature. So you can ignore everything else for now. We're going to go back to this second column here now, and we're just going to call it test name, yeah? And we're going to do varchar, okay? Because a name can't be an init. An init is an integer, by the way. Remember the last video I explained what the integer was in the database. Well, an int, it just means integer basically, right? And we're going to use varchar here, right? And I'm going to just put 80 in there, 80 characters, right? So the test name can be 80. Now just because this is your very first table you're creating, let's just leave it at that and press save at the bottom. Okay, brilliant. So you can see it's created a test table, and you can see this little key symbol here, which represents that it's a primary key. So now I want you to insert some data into this table. Click the insert tab up here, right? you should see structure. Make sure you're in the test table first. Click the test table. You should see browse, structure, SQL, search, insert. Now don't worry, I know this is a SQL course. We are going to get to the SQL, but I need to just show you guys how the databases work first, right? So press insert, and this is your test ID, which you can now leave blank. You can put something in there. In fact, I'm just going to put some characters in there just to show you that it won't work. You see, please enter a greater value. Yeah? So it doesn't work because it only allows numbers because we set it as an integer. So you can set this, but if you leave it blank, it uses the auto increment. So it'll be 1, 2, 3. Yeah? So the test name, basic test. So we press go. Now this is brilliant. Now this is why I wanted you guys to use PHPMyAdmin, because it shows you what is happening. So you can see here, insert into test table, right? Test ID, test name, values, null, dash basic test. Okay, so I'm going to explain this query to you. What is happening here is insert means we're inserting into the database, yeah? Into means we're specifying the table we're going to insert the data into. So in this case, it's the test table, yeah? And you'll notice if I zoom in, okay, cool. You will notice that you use these little symbols here. Now these aren't required, by the way. You don't need to use these, but you can use them, and it just structures it and makes the query a little easier to see. So you can see insert into test table, and then we go bracket, which is required, by the way. We go test underscore ID, which is our column name, test ID, and then we go comma, test underscore name, bracket. Now let me explain this bit for you guys. So these are the columns we want to set when we're creating, when we're inserting our data into the table, right? When we're adding the data to the table. Now if you didn't specify test ID, you would only specify test name. But because the test ID isn't required because it's automatically increment, it'll work fine. Basically, remember when we were setting up the table earlier and you had the option to have a default value? Any column that has a default value does not need to be added into here when you're inserting queries. Obviously, if you want to set that value for when you're inserting this record, then you should put it here. But basically, here goes the columns you want to insert, you want to change for this record. Any column that isn't in here, it'll use its default value. Or in the case of auto increment, it'll use the next value up, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, right? Okay, so then after here we have values, and this means that we're going to provide the values for these columns that we want to insert into the database, right? So null means nothing. Null means nothing. So in this case, the test ID is null because we want it to use the auto increment value, right? If you provide null, it'll default to the column's default value, or if it's an auto increment, it'll use the next value up. And then we go dash, and then we go quote, basic space test. Now quote means a string. A string is a series of characters. So if you want to type anything, something like that, yeah, the database won't accept that without two quotes. One to begin it, one to end it. Okay, and what that does, that says that this is a character array. This is a bunch of characters next to each other. Basically, anything like a sentence, a word, a name, always have these little quotes, single quotes next to there. Okay, so that's how the insert works. So what I want you to do now, then, we're gonna try this. We're gonna try this with our own query. Okay, I want you to click on firstly click on the test table here, and there we are. We can see our data in the database, 1 and basic test. Okay, so now one other thing before we go to the SQL and I show you how to do this yourself, you'll see here select star asterisk, select asterisk from test table. Now what this does, this means select something. When we use select, it means we're selecting something, right? And then the asterisk means we're selecting all of the columns. All of the columns in the table. That's what that means, right? And then we go from. From means that we're about to specify a table we want to pull the data from. Okay, and then we go test table. So this says select all the columns from the test table. Right, so let's insert some data through SQL now. So press on the SQL tab up here, and we're going to do what I explained, right? You'll have this default thing, just clear it. We'll get more to the select later. So type insert. Now, lowercase or uppercase doesn't matter, just keep the case the same, whichever case you're using. I like uppercase because it's easier to read. So we go insert into test underscore table bracket test name. We're not even going to provide the ID, right? Test name, right bracket, values, and then we're going to go my cool test name. Okay, cool. So insert into test table. So we're inserting into the test table. The column we want to set the value for the new data we're adding is the test name. We don't want to set test ID. That's what we're saying here, right? If we wanted to set the test ID, then we would do test ID and then we'd do a comma. But we're not going to do that because I want to show you how that this can work with just one column, right? Insert into test table, test name, values, my cool test name. And again, if you have multiple values here, then obviously you'd have a, you'd have comma here and the other values, right? And now what I want you to do is scroll down here and I want you to press go. There we are, one row inserted. Insert row ID 2, that's the auto increment that I was telling you about. Last time it was 1, now it's 2. Insert into test table, test name, values, my cool test name. So that query successfully worked. So if you press the test table now, you'll see that we have 2 records. Record 1, record 2. So that is how it works, right? That is how we insert data. So on the next lecture, I'll show you how to select and we'll make more detailed databases.